Trying to get it to, okay. 1 second.
I'm gonna grab some water.
Yes, I can't record it live.
Never mind, I had water.
You gonna record on Zoom or on YouTube?
Both. Well, the YouTube if we just keep it. So we're live now.
Okay, nice.
Okay, we're live, gentlemen.
So I'm on the YouTube, but I don't see it.
There's a slight delay with YouTube.
Okay, cool.
It's not like super live.
Yeah.
Like very close to live.
Mildly live.
Live-ish.
I guess that way if we said
I just went crazy
totally
looking
crazy,
at the live and confused
we
myself.
could just
1 second.
cut it right there. Be like, well, I just said something too crazy. Cancel it. Stop it from going live.
There we go. We're live now, guys. All right. All right. Thanks to
Hey
everybody
man, you
for
can't
showing
spell
up,
live
man.
without live.
True. Showstopper, drop the mic.
You have to be alive to be live.
That is true, yeah.
I guess that way if we
I
said
just went crazy. Anyway, thank you guys for showing up, man. This all started with a wild idea that I had in my head that since everything was going crazy and falling apart, that we have a time to kind of sort of control what happens as we put things back together. And so the first person I thought of was Wenzel, out of a conversation we had earlier in the summer when we were on tour. And he said this would be a great topic to have as a roundtable, and this is the result of that. So if anybody wants to know how this started and why we're doing this, just input, conversation, and see if we can snowball something. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's in your court, Winslow, from here on out.
Yeah, well, instead of a round table, we have a square desktop, but
yeah,
it still enables us to have communication among many different people in many different cities. Daniel Pinchbeck is in Vienna right now, and Daniel Pinchbeck is the author of How Soon Is Now. I asked him to be on this talk because this book was a huge inspiration for the last couple of weeks for me. In this book, he talks about such a wide variety of topics, and they're all about how society is, in what way society could be more sustainable. And Daniel, I'm sure you will talk a lot more about this. We're also here with Daro from Lucky Chops, and Leo P from Too Many Zoos, and Matt from Too Many Zoos, and Mike is gonna join in 1 second. He's actually texting me. Mike from Moon Hooch. Yeah, Daniel, do you want to give a little explanation about how you started on this path of becoming an author and what it could mean to reconceive society and the role of music, perhaps?
Sure. Well, yes. So, I mean, my career goes back a while at this point, but I wrote the first book I wrote was on psychedelic shamanism that came out in 2002. And I was visiting like cultures like in Africa to take psychedelic called iboga, and in the Amazon in Ecuador to work with ayahuasca, and visited the Indians in Mexico to work with psilocybin. And yeah, I just went through a whole process around kind of like shamanism, initiation. And part of my process was also very much around the ecological situation. Like when I was in the Amazon, I saw how fast the oil companies were destroying it. And I got more and more really, really worried that, you know, we weren't really dealing with our planetary ecology very, very well. And that we were actually in danger of really, you know, permanently destroying like our capacity to have like a big civilization like we do now. So I wrote a second book looking at the indigenous cultures and their prophecies called 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl. And then as Wenzel mentioned a few years ago, I put out a book called How Soon Is Now? And in that book, I was really thinking about, kind of thinking about the full spectrum of what was happening ecologically. I mean, it didn't really focus on the pandemic or, you know, the virus question, but just recognizing that we were really out of balance with nature, and then really thinking about the types of changes we would have to make in our society to deal with, you know, what's happening environmentally. And in some ways, I mean, there's a lot of different areas we can go. And I'm not going to. I mean, there's a lot of people here to talk, but in some ways, with the pandemic, we've seen how much of our activity is actually not that necessary. That we can actually stop a lot of our excess consumerism and excess travel and excess production, and yet we're still all here and surviving and so on. So maybe it's a wake-up call, and we're seeing like nature is kind of replenishing itself, like air pollution is going down, animals are returning, so maybe this is beginning to show us that the way we've been living is pretty crazy, and that actually we could begin to make a shift back into being more in balance with nature. And then hopefully some of the work I did with How Soon Is Now, and also this course that we're doing next week, Building Our Regenerative Future, we're really thinking about the types of changes people would have to make to become more self-sufficient, more resilient, more regenerative in their lives. Like, some people may want to grow more of their own food, or produce more of their own energy, or do composting, or build soil, all these things that have seemed totally unnecessary because it felt like this huge industrial machine was just going to protect us forever. Now we've realized how fragile the whole thing is.
And you also have a link that you want to share for this course, right?
I do. I will. Where do I put it up? Yes, I will drop it in the YouTube thing. It's on Crowdcast. Let me see if I can find the YouTube. Yeah, as we're talking, I'll find it and I will drop it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
You could probably also just put it as a comment below the live stream.
Yeah.
And David, I think Michael is trying to join the call.
Clicked him in. Sorry.
Yeah, I believe Josh Holcomb as well.
Okay, so we got 2 more people joining.
I'm here.
They're all here, right?
Nice.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Mike,
I've been here for a minute. I've been here for a minute.
Oh, cool.
Everybody's here. I didn't want to interrupt.
And is Josh in too?
I am here. One of the Joshes is here. The other one's not joining.
Awesome.
So
What
we have full house.
up?
Hey. Well, I think you got the best connection, Josh. Like, your image is the clearest. Dara, do you want to talk a little bit about the activism work you've been doing, since I feel like you've been thinking a lot about music and activism and the role music has in social evolution?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, yeah, thanks so much for setting this up, Wenzel, David, and to all of you for being here and listening as well. I think so one project that I worked on recently that felt like sort of like the most kind of basic sort of entry level way of conceiving what music can be doing right now is just on a very practical level of raising funds. So I helped organize a fundraiser with musicians representing different traditions from Southwest Asia, South Asia, North Africa, to support some different communities that have been disproportionately affected by the virus because of man-made political issues like economic sanctions that have made public health infrastructure almost non-existent in a lot of these places, and because of war and militarism, which is very much tied in to the type of world that has been like bubbling for so long.
Mm-hmm.
That I think Daniel, you were referencing in terms of this non-sustainable type of structure that we've been sort of seemingly trapped in for so long. I think we're seeing now that we have to change things in order to have any hope of moving forward. Of course, like many people will be fine, but if we really want to look at humanity as a whole, we're really we've reached a place even without this virus and without this situation that we find ourselves in now, that has been not sustainable for so long. And so, fundraising for people, for communities to just have their basic needs met, I think is one thing that is important to be doing, but I think also, you know, using the platforms that we have as artists to advocate for the changes that are necessary to make, you know, human life flourish on this planet, I think is also extremely important. But I think we can also look, you know, beyond that and you know, look at how the type of reflection that we need to do in this time and really turn inward into what we're doing as musicians and artists, and the type of spirit that we're putting out into the world, and you know, the type of consciousness that we are trying to create or raise or even shape within ourselves. So I think music and the people who make music, there's so many different sort of windows that we can sort of enter into this work from. You know, we have practical things like raising funds, like creating communities, and, you know, people working in tandem with each other, which we experience in the concerts that we play, right? Like when we're on stage and we're like all vibrating to the same groove and the same, you know, the same rhythms, like we're bringing people together in tandem, in harmony, in concert, and, you know, imagining like the kind of action that can, you know, kind of go forward from that, I think is really powerful and extremely open-ended as well. So, so yeah, I think these are a lot of different things that we can be thinking about right now.
I think a huge point is to get to a place where people agree that things need to change, because I think right now it's still a minority of people that think about sustainability, that think that, or that know that the system is on a crash course, that we need to get off fossil fuels, that the way we're treating the planet isn't sustainable. Most people don't really think about this. So I think for like a change to happen of any significance, getting the word out there is very important. Like to make people think about this. I remember for me, the moment where I started thinking about these kind of topics was actually Occupy Wall Street. Because suddenly I was like, what are all these people gathering for? You know, what are they interested in? Why is this? And then one thing led to another, and I started researching it and started becoming more passionate about environmentalism and reading about the different aspects of society and how they're not sustainable and what could be alternatives. But I think that is also the potential of this crisis, is to wake people up and provide an opportunity to rest and rethink what it could mean to live as a human species on this planet. And I think that is one way musicians can make a big difference, is just to have these conversations and to use the platform to engage people. And also, like what you said, the more direct way where, you know, raising money for a cause, or having non-profit organizations at the merch table. That's something we often do, is invite local groups that are activists to come to the show and give them a shout out from stage, so that people after the show go and talk to the nonprofit and getting engaged in whatever it is they're doing. And another thing we're doing right now is just planting trees, because a huge issue that we are facing, or gonna face increasingly, is global warming. And that is due to carbon dioxide in the air and the greenhouse effect that is caused by it. And so what we're doing is we're shipping out seeds for trees. And then people can tag Moonhooch trees and, you know, plant some trees. It's, you know, maybe not the biggest thing, but it will take some carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and create biomass, which, you know, is something that helps the healing of the planet.
I was also thinking that how we operate, reimagining how we do festivals. I think the idea of driving into the middle of nowhere to have a festival and to create these ecosystems inside of, like, sometimes almost pristine ground to have a festival on, and taking it outside of the urban space a lot. I think the urban spaces in the city needs the festival identity more so than going out kind of the kind of psychedelic getaway so much anymore. I think that no one's walking there, you know what I mean? So there's already that part of it. but I think with the pandemic, it kind of forces us to reimagine what festivals are going to be like and what touring itself is going to be like. So in putting that back together, having it based more on what's more ecological and what's more sustaining is a way to start thinking about that. One of the other ways is also bands used to tour together. Like 5 bands used to share a bus for tours. There's a lot of ways that we could sort of walk our talk in terms of musicians and artists, how we move and show that we're willing to make those kind of compromises and things too. I think that with the pandemic, it's going to say that we're all going to be probably more like the more situated in one club for a longer period of time, or in one city for a longer period of time, and trying to maximize areas as opposed to traveling so much. So those are ways to sort of like, I don't know, I'm just trying to think of ways to reimagine how things could work, especially with the festivals. I find a lot of times that that you're not necessarily even reaching the community that you're even going into. Like you go into Montana or wherever it is, it's a cool place, and the ground for the festival is cool, and there's an economic impact, but a lot of those places aren't desirable places that you would want to live. So you're not really having the sort of social impact that that festival should have on that space. Just my whole thing is just reimagining touring, reimagining how festivals are done. And like you're saying, if there's going to be information passed, to get back to the point where at festivals and those types of things, there are information being passed, just ideas, not necessarily, just ideas are being passed, and that the festivals and places that we play at and congregate at have environments where ideas are being passed. That's basically my addition to this conversation right now.
David, do you remember a long time ago, you told me you had this awesome idea that, we had all thought was really cool, but we thought it maybe, wasn't going to happen. It hasn't happened up until this point. But you had said we should all do a tour together where we tour in school gymnasiums. That's the venues. And I thought it was such a cool idea. And it strikes me now because unfortunately, venues are facing a harsh reality right now, as we all know. But schools are, they're going to be in existence, I hope so.
And as a taxpayer, you can get them pretty cheap. That's the reason why I say that. Yeah.
And music education is probably going to take a big hit, or it already has in schools as a result of this. We're teaching students if they're like, they don't have the school band program anymore, or they have to send in some band video Skype thing. It's crazy, but that could be a way for us to go out there, reach the kids who are going to make the societal change moving forward, on a grand scale. And they need music to give them that courage or that healing power that music can provide. And if we just go straight to them, or make it all ages thing or whatever, where they're at, we can still do what we want to do and not have to be burdened by the venue situation that's going to be really grim, I think, moving forward.
Well, that's funny you should say that. We've talked about that. We've talked about expanding that idea to parks now, where we can actually do social distancing. I sent Leo a link of people who are doing drive-ins are back now, where people are isolated in large parking lots in their car or whatever. But we could figure out ways to do it in the park. It's another thing. If you get the permit, you can do it pretty cheap, and we could mark off spaces where you could socially distance and do it in Central Park or in Brooklyn or something like that, and kind of do a kind of a social distance series of concerts. I think we could probably pull it off. Fairly recent. I think that's not crazy, but I think that's a great idea to try to get to try to pull resources together in our talents and make moves like that. I think it's a good idea.
I also love this idea of, thinking about touring festivals as something that connects us more with local spaces. Like Wenzel, what you're talking about with, I think bringing like local nonprofits into the show and stuff like that. And you know, David, like going around playing in parks, like really establishing yourself in connection with the people in the place that you're playing, rather than, you know, what feels so you know, emotionally and also environmentally unsustainable about touring a lot of the time, is it feels actually very disconnected from the local communities, with, you know, certain venues, and then once in a while you come across one that is totally a community space and it feels amazing. And so yeah, so I think that's an important thing to think about.
Well, also, if it's not beer or alcohol, we're not working. So we have to figure out ways to be able to work when there's no beer sales or alcohol sales. That's a big giant part of it too. You know what I mean? A lot of the reason why we're not working is because that's a giant part of our industry. That the ability to serve food, alcohol, and the service part of it is a giant part of what we do. But if we get back to playing music in the park and whatever, we can kind of go around those things. Nothing can stop us.
That's kind of where we all started from too.
Yeah.
Full circle.
All right. Anybody else got anything else to say? I don't want to hog this up, but that's my idea.
I just posted a link. There was a group called the Polish Ambassador, and they did a group called, a thing called the Permaculture Action Tour, which you can check out. And really, they tried to mobilize their fan base. And I really think that it's a time, considering the urgent and critical things that are happening in the world right now, where if you have like a large audience or large community, you know, you really should think about, you know, how you can use that as a platform, you know, not just for, you know, art and music and creativity, but also for, you know, moving people in a good direction. And I think that this Permaculture Action Tour that the Polish Ambassador did was a great model for that. So they would have people in advance agree, like you could actually, you know, get a free ticket for the concert if you showed up the day before and helped build like, you know, an organic garden in a vacant lot or something. You know, so they really tried to integrate, and you know, it's also kind of part of the messaging of their music at the same time. But I think it's a very interesting model for kind of you know, kind of mobilizing the community that you've already built, the audience that you've already built, to actually start doing, you know, practical local things together and kind of leave community infrastructure like everywhere you go. You know, which is kind of what you guys have been saying implicitly, I think, if I'm hearing right. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it all points in a very similar direction. The thing that Dave was talking about and Josh was talking about playing in schools and having more direct impact on local communities. I think that all ties also into Permaculture Action Days. We have done a few Permaculture Action Days as well, where we just went to community gardens and played music there and raise the money to build infrastructure for that garden. So maybe someone wanted some raised beds to have some more crops, and it totally felt like it was linking the community in a very meaningful and unique way. You know, because people come for the music, but then they connect with each other and together build sustainable infrastructure. And I feel like linking that with music education and environmental education and direct action is a really good way to move forward in these times.
I'm curious how many people here know about Extinction Rebellion or have been following that kind of movement at all? No?
Yeah, I've been following.
I only heard the phrase. I only heard the name. I haven't looked into it.
I mean, it's been very successful in the UK. It just started a couple of years ago. And last year, like they took over, like I think 7 bridges in London, and had very joyful kind of occupation protests. You know, had a little bit of the Occupy Wall Street vibe, actually, a little bit of that sense of like a celebratory or festival kind of protest. And in some cases, they were actually really persuading the police to kind of not hassle them or even to like join them to a certain extent. And they actually, you know, the Extinction Rebellion, yeah, the idea is they have like a few different basic goals. One is they're asking governments to tell the truth about the ecological crisis and the climate crisis, because governments have really not been, you know, forthcoming about what their scientists are saying. You know, and second of all, they're setting like they're setting a very significant target. They're saying that by 2030, we should try to go carbon neutral across the whole planet. And that's very, very extreme. That is very much what the science is telling us. Like in 2018, the IPCC, International Panel of Climate Change, the United Nations, issued a report and said we only have about 10 years to radically reduce the amount of CO2 that we're emitting, or we're going to sort of collapse our civilization. So they're taking that seriously, and they're trying to put these ideas into action by doing civil disobedience, which is nonviolent sit-ins. Sometimes people will lock themselves, super glue themselves to the doors of the prime minister's house, or lock themselves to a bank or whatever. So they're really forcing disruption to bring about a systemic change. So tell the truth on climate change, go to carbon neutral by 2030, which is very extreme. And the last one is there has to be a way where the people and the government can collaborate better. So they've created this idea of citizen assembly. It's kind of like juries, where you randomly select a group of citizens and have them kind of help guide decision-making around climate. And obviously they also support things like the Green New Deal and so on. But it's an interesting movement. I recommend you guys check it out. They're about to restart in the US, and their idea is by next spring, 2021, to have like mass civil disobedience in Washington, DC, to force the government to move much faster on climate change, which really is, Wenzel mentioned it, but it is a problem that is looming over all of our future right now. Like Europe was 1.4 degrees Celsius warmer last winter than ever before, which is very, very significant. And at that level, agriculture starts becoming really difficult. Droughts become, more and more common. Like even countries are already experiencing droughts this time of year, which don't experience them usually to August. So things are changing very, very rapidly. And in a way, people who have communities and audiences, they can really help activate those communities much quicker right now if they get, kind of involved with that.
Yeah, that links back to what we talked also about using platforms to collaborate with nonprofits. I would definitely look into Extinction Rebellion. That's what they called. Oh wait, I think you muted. Daniel,
Sorry,
I think you.
Yeah, I got it. I just wrote the name down in the chat so people can look it up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, last year, my friend who lives in Holland, that Holland never has droughts. And he said suddenly it didn't rain for, I think, over a month in the summer, which is not like a common thing for Holland. And so that was like a very direct impact on climate change. And with that then comes the danger of forest fires, as we also have seen in Australia and the rainforest. Yeah, I think we were slowly moving into an age where ignoring environmental urgency is no longer an option. It's just a question of how effective and how well organized the transition can be, because theoretically we already have all the tools and all the technologies to live completely carbon neutral. There's actually no physical law preventing us from being sustainable, from getting off fossil fuels. But it's just like an addict mentality where the old habit of, using cheap gas to get energy is hard to shake that habit, and to make personal sacrifices or have companies make sacrifices on their profits, for the greater good. And I think this is really what's holding us back, is the desire to maximize profit is getting in the way, or it's contradicting a straightforward plan of action to a more sustainable future.
Yeah, and I think something that hasn't really been addressed yet in this discussion is the leading cause of climate change, which is actually animal agriculture. Animal agriculture releases more greenhouse gas emissions than all of the automotive sector combined. And while it sounds like the Extinction Rebellion is doing some cool stuff, I think something everybody could do is change their diet and their dietary choices. Because the more I've learned about this stuff, the more I've realized that our diet has a huge impact on the planet, and which agricultures we choose to support. Factory farming is responsible for most of the Amazon deforestation. It's a global crisis, the meat industry, and just by limiting and or eliminating meat from your diet, you're actually making a huge difference ecologically. Now, I don't have numbers to spout off, but everything I've read, and I'd urge people to look into this, to the effect that actually, eating seafood, eating beef, eating chicken, even all these things have a serious impact on our environment, a lot more than most people would think. And there's some really good documentaries. What the Health is a really great documentary to check out. Cowspiracy. These are on Netflix. The Game Changers is really good also. And if you're interested in some books, there's this book called How Not to Die, which focuses in a very unbiased way on the medical impacts that meat has on our bodies. So there's a lot of resources out there to educate ourselves about the way we eat. And I think a lot of people are afraid to talk about this and afraid to actually look at their own habits, their own eating habits, and change them. It's a touchy subject, food. It's mixed in with culture. It's mixed in with all kinds of things. But I think it's time now, because we are in this mass extinction period, where we need to make major changes, not only in sharing buses or riding less in our cars, but what we put on our plates.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is probably the simplest contribution we can make today. All the other actions are more about organizing something in the future. But I think that is like a very simple thing. It's like, okay, I'm not going to buy any more meat. Maybe you don't think it makes a big difference if one person does it, but if a whole community, it adds up. Like, then the grocery stores buy less meat, which then makes farmers produce less meat. And when you raise less cattle, you cut less forest down for cattle, and the manure of cattle doesn't pollute the environment. I mean, it's also amazing if you look at the dead spot in the Mexican Gulf, of just how animal agriculture has created this runoff of toxins that is killing all the fish and wildlife in rivers and in the ocean. And that is also releasing a lot of methane gas, and methane is much more dangerous gas than carbon dioxide in global warming. So, yeah.
Somebody I met made a really wonderful new app called Unifier. I put it in both comments, UNIFYRE. And the idea is like, we have a Vase, which is like a petition drive. We have Kickstarter for raising money for companies. Unifier is this idea that you agree to do something when a certain number of people have also agreed to do something. So it could be something like, if you all have big bands that have a lot of reach, you could be like, okay, we're all going to agree to stop eating meat for a year, or only eat meat like once a month or something, when 50,000 people have signed up, So that way, because I think a lot of times what stops people from doing things is they don't feel that their individual actions are meaningful. But if they knew that they were part of like a movement or a groundswell where something like 50,000 or 100,000 or 1 million people were all agreeing to do this thing together, it could be really, really powerful. So as we talk, I'm just trying to think about next steps or action steps. If you could unite like this community of musicians and so on, maybe that's the kind of thing you could actually do together as a sort of collective drive, and then figure out how you use your outreach and your social media and Instagram and all these things, to YouTube, to really get people on board for this type of program.
I think it's a great idea. That is, I've never heard of it. But
Absolutely, it's a really cool idea. I do want to just say though that one person going vegan actually does have a gigantic impact. As much as it may feel like it doesn't, you know, one person who goes vegan can save approximately, I have this pulled up, 219,000 gallons of water a year, because it takes 1,000 gallons of water to produce just 1 gallon of milk. And beef has an overall water footprint of roughly 4 million gallons per ton. So, you know, I could keep going off in numbers.
I'd be a little careful about some of those figures, although I think that essentially you're right. There's no doubt that factory farming and animal agriculture is one of the biggest contributors, you know, along with industry and, you know, manufacturing and cars and so on. But I mean, I think sometimes people who get into veganism become a little bit doctrinaire at that being like the one cure for all the planetary ills. And I think it's a very, very important piece of the puzzle. But I sometimes when people get too doctrinaire about it, I think they begin to, it almost like they create a boundary or a dichotomy, like another us against them kind of thing. You know, but you're absolutely right though. I mean, the devastation of the Amazon, which is one of the biggest problems we have right now, is definitely largely due to deforestation, to creating soybean plantations to feed cattle for China. You know, we have to remember that a lot of these countries in the world that are developing, like they're so happy to now have a bigger middle class who want to have the diet that America has been having for the last 50 years, you know, Europe's been having, you know, so it's really hard to go to those cultures and be like, hey, you can't actually have, you know, the same type of nutrition and food that we've had because we know that it's going to kill the planet. But that's somehow what we have to do. But in a way, the only way that could possibly happen is if, you know, us from these rich, you know, cultures like, you know, the US and Europe were to make the first step, you know, we're to kind of be like, okay, we're giving it up first. And we're doing it, you know, as a kind of spiritual thing and something for the future of the planet, for the future of our descendants and so on, you know, then maybe that could create a movement in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
I think the pandemic is forcing us to think that way anyway, just for survival. I think that a lot of the supply chains that we're used to, we see that they could be severed. So I think we're forced to really think about new ways of eating, new ways of getting food, growing food, and being able to sustain your life. Period. Now, I think this, from healthcare to food to how we live and new ways of thinking. I think this pandemic has kind of showed us that it's time to rethink a whole lot of things and how we do them and the ways that we can do them, because we could easily see that all kinds of supply chains can be cut off at any time. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, who knows how it's going to be next year, right? If this year we ran out of toilet paper and all the other basic things, I mean, what if we like really ran out of food to the point?
I thought that was crazy anyway, that toilet paper was a major concern. You know what I mean? That shows a lot right there. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The inability to deal with one shit. You know what I'm saying? That's your biggest fear, is that you know what I mean, that your shit might be in your hand. That's a lot to look at right there in itself. You know. Not to get too Freudian about it, but you guys know what I mean. That the first thing that ran out and was a major concern was toilet paper, not food, not face masks, not, you know, it was toilet paper. It was a commodity for about a week. Anyway, anyone else got it? Where are we at? There's more people in this.
I mean, maybe
conversation
with the
haven't heard
music
from.
industry, maybe with the music industry crashing, we should all become toilet paper salesmen. You know?
Well, a lot of people in the music industry. Well, I mean, the music industry, we see it's kind of a paper tiger now. Do you know what I mean? Like, where is the music industry right now? Even big artists are forced to like double down on doing whatever they can on their Instagram. There's not much a record label or a booking agent can do for you right now.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why I came to you and was like, it's time to rethink these things, because if that infrastructure leaves us, we're sort of stuck. and if we're going to be stuck putting things back together, because from what I know, there were a lot of musicians and artists and thinkers and poets and writers and painters who put all of this together a long time ago to create this system that we have right now. And if it's falling apart, it's our chance to put it back together how we see fit, I think. And a lot of these ideas are good. I think they'll be so much better when they're like you say, shared amongst all of us, and they can be debated and everyone tries to find their way to use them. I think for me, that's more where it's at. I like hearing all the information and then finding my way to use it, you know?
Yeah.
I think little creative initiatives that I've noticed all three of our bands have done, you know, little things that are whatever fun for us or that are unique to us. When other artists see like other artists establishing these little initiatives, it sparks these things like, oh, I can do something like that too, which I think is super important because I totally agree with you 100%, David. Like, this is our chance to put the pieces back together in a way that is not only, you know, empowering to artists, but that allows us to then empower others as well for, you know, create music and societal change. And I think it can start with little simple things like how we're doing, basically just right now, this kind of thing. This might inspire another artist who's watching, be like, oh, I can do a little thing too. And just that is kind of empowering that we can do creative things as artists. And we don't need to have the blessing of a label or management or whoever it is, which we've been indoctrinated to think, you know, for so long now. Now that all that stuff has disappeared, basically, there's no gigs for the time being. We have an opportunity to do little things that maybe we've always wanted to do, like this or anything, basically. And that is going to inspire other people to become empowered to do their own things, which will then give people the ability to focus on big things as well. I don't know. One thought.
Yeah. The food supply might be even a more immediate concern than we think. You know, like I mean, you know, a lot of the food agriculture depends on migrant workers, and a lot of places migrant workers haven't been traveling because of the virus, or not in the quantities they used to travel. I just read how in Italy they're now retraining like the Italians to go back into the fields, like people who had totally different professions, because they're not bringing in all the people from Romania who actually do all the heavy lifting on the crops. And you know, I know the UN has predicted there could be really big famines this summer. As much as 250 million people could be, you know, suffering from the effects of famine. So, you know, the level of change that we're going to see, you know, because of the pandemic and how it's like, you know, overturned all of our systems, you know, it's really hard to say at this point. But you know, there may be more destabilizing things happening more quickly. And that's where it's very important for people like yourselves who have audiences and people listen to you to, you know, really do the work to understand what's happening, you know, on the planet, you know, understand what's happening ecologically, you know, sociopolitically, and, you know, figure out how maybe you get your people, you know, moving in really great directions, you know, like becoming more resilient and starting to grow some of their own food or learn about soil and all the stuff that actually was always really crucial to life, but we just haven't had to think about it because everything was made so easy for us, you know.
I recently had a conference call with your friend, actually, Gregory from the Region Network. And I think what he's working on is extremely powerful and has a huge potential to change society and the way we think about value. So he's been working on a cryptocurrency. A cryptocurrency is a digital currency that keeps track of sequestered carbon. So when anybody would plant a tree or have a garden, you could use his system to calculate how much carbon you took out of the air and sequestered and created biomass with it. And so then you can sell those tokens for the value of sequestered carbon. And I found this very interesting because it kind of brings together ecology and economy, which usually are at odds with each other. Like when we're cutting down the rainforest, we could be profiting, for example, you know, to plant soybeans to feed cattle or to create furniture. So his idea is that when you lose ecological diversity, that you also lose money, because the system he's working on equates value with ecological diversity and with the ability of ecosystems to sequester carbon. And he's also been talking about releasing music through his cryptocurrency, where the release of the music then promotes the currency and also stores the value of the music in the currency, which then also rewards those people who plant trees or permaculture gardens to sequester carbon. I thought that was a very interesting initiative. And within the next couple of months, he's going to go live with this platform. And I'll definitely make sure to share it with all you guys to see if we want to release music through his system or how we feel aligned to promote it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's been a big problem with our capitalist system is, you know, corporations have been allowed to pollute for free. It's called externalities, you know, so they haven't had to pay for exterminating animals or destroying ecosystems or all this stuff. Those are all passed on to the people. You know, that's one of the many things that we would have to address. And yeah, I totally agree. What he's trying to do with the region network is a brilliant idea, because yeah, trying to ascribe a value to those things that are actually very, very important to life, but our system, as it's developed over the last few centuries, just doesn't have a way of valuing them.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what do people think about like engaging with governments about this? I mean, Daniel, you mentioned it in the context of Extinction Rebellion and the work that they're doing, you know, to put pressure on governments. I think we're in such a weird place right now where, you know, the space of government has become such a surreal kind of thing in the US. But, you know, government is also where the policy decisions are being made that enable corporations to go unchecked. And, you know, we see rollbacks of environmental protections. We also see, you know, the US military, for example, is a bigger polluter than many industrialized nations like Sweden and Norway, for example. And at the same time, you know, in this crisis, we see how the government is treating those very workers that the food supply depends on as expendable. So, you know, what do we, like, how can we even engage with the government at this point? Like, of course, you know, doing, you know, small initiatives, community building initiatives is absolutely essential. You know, we're building collective power in a way that will, you know, be necessary if we're going to have any effect on that scale. But at the same time, like, you know, as musicians in particular, like, do we see ourselves having any sort of responsibility to engage with that kind of space, or is it better for us to stay out of it and engage in the small scale things? I'm trying to wrap my head around this very question.
Personally, I think that this is just my thought on it. I think now it's more about trying to educate the people around you. I think as this pandemic has shown, governments are sort of obsolete. And I think that artists, especially in American culture, are the bigger entities than anything. Elevating your platform as an artist and showing the right way and doing what you believe in is probably more powerful to me than anything, because that's who we are, what people look to. Every tragedy, every experience has a soundtrack, and this one will too. I think the power of just being an artist and standing up for what you think is right, or whatever your positioning is really the most powerful tool that we have right now. And I'm seeing it in what you might call negative ways in other artists, but you can see when the light is shining on them, there are millions of people watching. So it's a matter of like trying to convert the optics over to the audience seeing and believing what you're trying to, for lack of a better word, preach. You know, I really think that's where it's at. I think that like many of you, this November, I'm going to hold my nose and vote, but it's not going to be the happiest vote. I don't, you know what I mean? I'm going to hold my nose and do it. But I really believe more in like looking at the like people around me and in where I live at. I see a lot of really good people who are sort of getting burnt by these kind of situations, and there's no discourse. And for me, it's more about that. There's just no discourse on what are you thinking? No, what are you thinking? Oh, here's an idea. I don't think anyone knows exactly what to do. There are these things that need to be done in a hurry, like you said. The ecosystem's going to shit at the moment. But at the same time, we've seen with this pandemic, if we just slow down for a moment, it kind of comes back. So there are some like bright spots in these situations. But as far as me, as far as the government goes, in extreme measures, yeah. But it's more about building the community to like create the force. To me, that's what it's about. I do think you do have to petition for the government for extreme things, but more about building communities of ideas right now for me. That's where I think it's at.
Yeah, I guess I would say that it's probably not either or. I mean, you kind of government, is the only force that's big enough to do like really, really some big things, right? Like when the Second World War happened, the US government was able in just like a couple months to shift all of its industry and manufacturing, to wartime production and, tax the wealthy at over 90% during that period, because they knew that everybody had to contribute everything they had to defeat, the Nazis and the Japanese and so on. So, governments, that's a great example of how a government can really mobilize, the entire productive force of a country to do something. And unfortunately, I mean, that's really what we need to happen right now, with the ecological crisis. That's what, Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Suarez were talking about with the Green New Deal, which would basically be, particularly now with the huge unemployment that we have, that would really be basically the only shot for the U.S. to kind of, redirect, itself in the right direction. Because it would create millions of new jobs just to install like solar and wind and, retrofit all the buildings and urban composting. It would actually employ like everybody in the country who needs a job. Regenerative farming, which is much more labor intensive than industrial farming. It is really a vision for how you could transform the society, and really government is the only force in society that's has the oomph and the size and scale, and also the legal capacity to do that. So I think government is really crucial, and then also communities are really crucial. And that's another thing maybe you could think about. In terms of what you're doing, maybe we talked about the permaculture action drawer, call for action, getting people to go vegetarian with something like the Unifier app. But another thing would be maybe to have community meetups or town halls as you tour and try to help support the creation, because people in a way are sort of hypnotized by kind of the entertainment and distraction culture in places like the US. They don't feel very empowered to have like a social or political or ecological perspective. And maybe they look to public artists who are very important in our society as leaders, who could actually direct them to step up and have more of a voice, in how their society operates. Maybe particularly young people.
No, I'm just speaking in terms of like just historically, a lot of our cultural revolutions have come from festivals. Woodstock, Lollapalooza. There's a whole host of music events that have changed the culture and the way that we're thinking. And those people brought together those communities. That's what I'm saying. That wasn't a government thing. But once you create those trends out of those countercultures and subcultures, it puts pressure on the government to change because society changes. I was just watching a documentary on advertising and how like the hippies influenced Coke to change their advertising based on counterculture movements. That's what I mean. Like governments will change if the culture changes. And the only way Only way we can change the culture is by going into the communities and trying to evoke the conversation. That's what I'm saying.
I mean, to me, what you described is a little bit of the tragic reality of what happened in the 60s and the 70s. Like there was this very powerful counterculture that was also very political and ecological and fighting for civil rights. And somehow the conservative forces, you know, in the security complex, you know, somehow nullified that. I mean, they assassinated the leaders of the Black Panthers, like Malcolm X and Freddie Hampton. You know, they shot a bunch of protesters in Kent State who were nonviolent anti-war protesters. So they sent a whole message to that generation that, you know, rebellion past a certain point wasn't going to be tolerated. You know, so then what happened is that people were like, okay, we're not going to do that. So we'll go into marketing. We'll take the groovy psychedelic graphics and we'll make better Coca-Cola commercials and so on. So, you know, I mean, you're describing it as a positive thing. For me, what you're describing is a little bit of a historical tragedy. And that we, you know, if that movement had actually been allowed to grow organically, we would have had a really powerful left in this country and a true political counterculture. And instead we don't. We have a fake politics and a fake.
I get it. That's because, in my opinion, maybe those movements weren't extreme enough that once the edge became the middle, we didn't get all the things that we fought for. Do you know what I mean? That, you know.
Well, they also assassinated. I mean, you can look at Freddie Hampton or the Black Panthers or Martin Luther King or John F. Kennedy or Robert F. Kennedy. I mean, the people who were really representing the potential for there to be a systemic change, who had the eyes of the masses on them, you know, they were targeted, you know. And
I'm just saying, in theory, it works. Artists can come together, create those kind of movements. That's what I'm saying. In theory, it does work. We can create those kind of movements out of nowhere. There's always going to be a co-opting of counterculture. I mean, that's evident in gentrification everywhere. A lot of areas that are gentrified are where we all went to live and we built community in 10 years ago, and we're artists in places like that, and we made them hip and cool. And now, you know,
and then also, but it's not a question of always, because actually we're entering a new reality.
Yeah.
I mean, what's happening environmentally is not something that we have a precedent for. Just as this pandemic is not something we have a precedent for. And we're seeing, you know, profound changes that are accelerating, that are definitely going to impact all of our futures. You know, and we're going to see, you know, maybe cities like flooded. We're going to see, you know, droughts. We're going to see.
We saw that in Michigan.
Water, you know, and things are going to be changing really, really fast. And people are going to have to learn new skills, and a lot of the skills they've been learning maybe are not even going to be that appropriate for what comes next. You know, so yes, there's an incredible role for artists to really understand, you know, to be kind of like the antenna of the culture and see how things are changing and help to, you know, push that change faster in a way. You know?
Yeah, true.
I think one of the biggest things that people can do is well, I think it's like double-sided in the sense that they have a group of people like us who can make small or large contributions, you know, depending on the context. But I think there's like a mindset that can be taken against, not necessarily against, but like we're talking about trying to find ways to essentially extend the life of the earth and do all these things that we want to do. And I think maybe one of the best ways that can be accomplished is by, I don't really know how to articulate what I'm trying to say, but it's like play by the majority's rules, right? In the sense, not play by the rules, but like if you make an option that if you have an option, if you have two options, it's like people in power are always going to follow money, and they're always going to take the option that's cheaper and saves them resources and time and money. And so I think one of the biggest things that people can do, like for example, a really good analogy is like a water bottle. It's like it's double-edged because it helps save plastic, but what you're selling is not the fact that it's selling plastic, it's the fact that it's a great water bottle and it keeps my water cold for 3 days and I have ice in it from Tuesday. And so it's like then you're really opening up the demographic of people you can speak to, because there's a shit ton of people who really don't care if they're wasting plastic or not. But then you have a lot of people that will purchase this water bottle because it keeps ice cold for 36 hours. And so I think that scale can be taken way larger to like a music festival or any sort of thing we're talking about, where it's like, if you have a source of energy that's gonna save a company money, because the reality is like, if we're talking about Bonnaroo or Coachella or any major music festival, those festivals are all owned by major companies, major corporations that are going to that are most definitely going to insist on playing by their rules when it comes to things like working with communities and the way they are sourcing the power for these places and all of this sort of stuff and the carbon footprint it has. If the option that we as the people who are trying to change these things provide them is in their interest of finances, then it's an obvious choice for both parties, because for us it's a win because they're accomplishing what we want them to accomplish by either whatever it is, using solar energy or doing these it could be anything, like just compostable material when you're serving plates at a festival. Like there's a million things, a million areas you could do what I'm saying in. But if you make that option the cheaper, more financially viable option for those companies, then they really have no choice. And those people are not prideful in their moral decisions. Like, I think one thing that's really obvious is, like, again, people in those places of power are going to follow money. I mean, you look at, like, I mean, if in my opinion, if you look at the legalization of marijuana, it's like has nothing to do with morals. For 50 years in the country, we thought weed is bad, but then a certain group of people discovers they can make more money by just selling it rather than incarcerating people for it, and now it's fine. So it just goes to show you, like, massive things can change. You can have these gigantic things change if you just implore the people who are in charge of those decisions to make the decision, to make it easy for them. So it's like, yes, we're a minority, but if we can dump our money into creating solar energy that doesn't cost a lot of money to install, because right now things like solar energy, which are the answer, are vastly more expensive because the infrastructure is not there. So if the cost of these things, which typically do cost more and they require more time, more resources, if there's a way to create an efficient route that doesn't financially burden the people who are making these poor decisions ecologically, then it's a really, really easy win-win, because they're accomplishing their goal of saving money and we're accomplishing our goal of saving the earth, right? So it's like, I think one of the biggest things people can do is just literally give their money to things they want to see be furthered. If you want to see further solar energy, a great way to do that is to donate money to solar energy research and to furthering that technology, so that solar energy, the cost of solar energy installation isn't twice, 3 times, 4 times the cost, the initial startup cost for a company to run off of, a fossil fuel. And that can, again, that goes all the way down the bracket from like what kind of plates you use to using water bottles. It's all about, in my opinion, finding the incentive that you're selling rather than forcing this ideology down someone's throat. Because whether or not we all sit here and agree that we want the earth to live longer, there's a majority of people who don't care, because it's much beyond what they're thinking about and their lifestyle and the tunnel vision that they're executing. It's way, it doesn't enter their equation. So it's like, if you can present to them something that does enter their equation, where it's like, you'll have ice for 3 days, you'll save money, you'll do X, Y, and Z, and you present the benefit to them, then it's becomes a much easier argument to be had, I think. And also something that I think can just move progress a lot faster than what I think a lot of people do, which is
Yeah.
trying to instill an ideology in someone that doesn't have an interest in learning
Yeah.
that.
Matt, I have a couple problems with that. I mean, one problem is that there's a lot of perverse incentives that have been built into the system. So because the oil companies and the meat grower, the meat industry, has a lot of lobbying power in Washington. They've actually often, they get subsidized, and so their costs are less than they should be, because they're actually getting taxpayer money and in fact, for a number of years, solar has actually been cheaper than fossil fuels, and the technology keeps getting better and better. But I mean, there's a lot of perverse incentives used by the fossil fuel companies to kind of reduce the capacity of solar. And then the other thing I would say is that people have been indoctrinated through the media to have a set of, I mean, they're already having an ideology. Even the not caring and not connecting is an ideology that's been imposed onto them by a whole media indoctrination system. And actually what we have to do is deprogram them from that indoctrination, which is not an easy thing to do. Psychedelics are one useful tool for that, which is another subject that is near and dear to my own thinking.
Well, isn't the problem that we're not hearing these things in a song lyric? You know what I mean? We're not hearing these things in a song lyric. They're not being discussed amongst artists outside of, not mainstream artists. That was one of the things that I was thinking about when this whole pandemic started. Because like, there's no Marvin Gaye, there's no nothing to get us through this. You know what I mean? The sound of COVID is going to be 6ix9ine or something else. You know what I mean? When we think back as the soundtrack of this, there is an artist who stood up and kind of given us the what's going on perspective that really changes attitudes and gets us to look at it. But one of the things I was thinking about when Matt was saying that is kind of like Kung Fu capitalism, where you can sort of use the weight of itself against itself. Do you know what I mean? By creating ideas and changing the culture and making it I can't think of the words I'm trying to say, but making it so it's just common sense, basically. That why are we doing these things this way? Why are we not questioning this? But again, if it's not in a song, if it's not in the album artwork, how are the people getting these little bits of information?
I mean, a thing that we could do, for example, is make a track together that's produced through solar energy. We go into like some solar powered studio or do it ourselves with solar energy, and then have a link to a company that provides solar energy.
Well, I think the thing is with us, especially with the bands that are here right now, is that none of us need power to play anyway. So it's more of a Grateful Dead thing of encouraging people to bring their own tape recorder and you disseminate the information. Why are we recording the information? Bring the people together, like I said, in some sort of environment. You guys put your own recorders up, and those people go out and send that music out into the world. We should be responsible for the gathering, not the dissemination of the information. Those are two different things. I feel like there are better people to come together to give the information if we as artists can get them into the place where it needs to happen. You know what I mean? I think Daniel has a much better perspective on the argument and where it's going. My role in this as an artist should be to put the people in the room and try to generate the ideas. I mean, that's a lot of responsibility right there. But it's not something that I'm seeing when I look at the art that I'm seeing put out doesn't match the times that I live in, is what I'm trying to say. And that makes it very difficult. If it's that way for me, then I can imagine what it must be like for the average person, especially in this moment that we're living. It's a special time in history that we have a chance to sort of like create the soundtrack to this and to create what is to come behind this. Yeah, that's what I think about that.
I love it. I think it's awesome. I think that's great. Yeah, I mean, once again, I mentioned the assassinations of the sort of, more radical leaders of the 60s who might have moved American society in a different direction. and then we also saw, the song "Power to the People" was John Lennon, right? And then he was, killed in 1980, potentially by somebody who had CIA affiliations. I think basically like that and other incidents sent a message to the entertainment culture and the rock and roll culture and the music culture to have, that to be safe, you're supposed to have like no political or ecological meaning or content, and for the most part, since then musicians have been, except for like some of the hip hop artists, but then look what they went through, the early hip hop artists, before kind of the corporate record companies, kind of took over hip hop in a way. But yes, so basically the message from the mainstream establishment was you can have success as an artist or a musician as long as you don't touch, these types of subject matters anymore. And it was subliminally very powerfully set. So since then, music has kind of lost its connection to, political, radical content for the most part. I mean, with some exceptions. But I think what you're saying is great. What, both you guys are saying. Maybe there's an opportunity now to, kind of, try to fill in the gaps and use music to get, some really profound messages out to the world.
Yeah, well, a lot of it too is that how we distribute music and the value of music has changed from those times too. The radio doesn't hold a thing over your head now. Do you know what I mean? You're not forced to write a song to get to this one purveyor of sound. So that's a radical change from what a lot of people went through in the other movements. The ultimate goal, if you were going to be heard, was to get on the radio, and there was so much payola and corporate control over that now any of us can, like, there's probably 50 million views right here in this conversation. If you did a collective number of views amongst all the groups here, that's powerful. Then there are not record companies who have had that much attention on them. That's an astounding thing that probably Jimi Hendrix.
I think that's way under. I think that's way
I'm
under.
just throwing something off the top of my head.
I think it's closer to like 200 or 300.
That's amazing in terms of media. Go ahead, Leo. You chimed in.
Oh yeah. Well, I actually think that we should have a acoustic music festival. We've been talking about this a lot. And it's an idea Too Many Stews had a long time ago, and I think it'd be really cool. Because I see all these different bands setting up festivals. There's always like whatever fests, like Camp Bisco or something like that, where it's like Disco Biscuits. And what's really cool about us is that we're acoustic, so we don't really have to use all these resources. I mean, we have our saxophones or trumpets or whatever you play, and we can just hit them and play them, and like that's kind of beautiful in itself. And it could be really cool to try to do something acoustic where you use like under tunnels and in like caves. Like I know Moonhooch, you guys a lot of times you refer to music as cave music. Bring it back to the the roots, the actual caves. The actual places where music like that can really have its natural reverb, and maybe some type of like cool. We pick some type of like cool town or something where there's like some beautiful cathedrals to perform in too, and then have like just a few stages that are all acoustic. I mean, it's something that I think if it caught on, more people would be into it and like just into the idea. And if something that caught on, it could really be helpful as far as like performing and not using all these like resources, and like another thing, like I've noticed, just like what we're talking about generally about like wastefulness and stuff, is like, dude, there's just like not enough water fountains. Like there's not enough water. Like that's my biggest thing, is like there just should be more giant gallons of water that people can consume in public, and less bottled water. Like what, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
But you know what I'm saying? Like there should be like every gas station, there should be gigantic jugs of water, and you pay your 25 cents or whatever instead of buying a bottle of water. Like that's just like not available, like a lot of times, you know. But you think about it, it's like water is like the most important thing in the world. Like, I don't know, those are my two main thoughts.
That's a good
Yeah,
idea.
and the bottles that are being wasted, they end up in landfills or in the ocean or pollute waterways. I think bottled water is a huge issue, you know,
Yeah,
and I think there's also an incentive here not to make fountains available, so you have to buy water, because if you
exactly.
go
That's what I'm
if you
saying.
go to
Like,
the airport, often the fountains are broken,
yep.
and then right next to it is a water store.
Have you
And
been to Bern? Bern,
Barren?
Switzerland?
Yeah,
I don't think we've been there.
You would love it. There's fountains everywhere. Just gigantic fountains that you can drink from.
That's awesome. I
and
mean,
Rome too. Rome also
people
has
are
this, like, ancient
people
fountain.
are people are banking off of like laziness, you know, in people. Like, they're just like, well, this is so easy to get the water bottle, but like it should be just as easy, like, to have a giant jug. Like, if there was just giant jugs everywhere of water that you pay like 25 cents or whatever, I understand people need to make some type of profit. Then like people would be way more enticed to have a water bottle. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I always felt like that's the most like important thing in life is water, basically. And uh the way we consume it, you know, on a general basis is like ridiculous. I mean, not we. I mean, I'm not talking about you. Maybe more like we as like a general we.
Generally, yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I'm like, why is it not that way? Like, it's some like, you ever been at a bar or something and like you just have to, and they don't have like some type of water thing, and you end up talking to the bartender like multiple times. You're like, can I get a water? Because like they know they're not gonna like make a lot of money off of you getting water, that you might not even tip them that much or whatever. And I'm just like, yeah, 1 second, okay, you want a martini? Okay, you know, and you're just like, can I get a can I get a, you know, it's almost like water is like, you know, people are hating on water, and it's like the most important thing. You know what I mean? It gets like a bad rap. It's like, it's like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Mhm.
it should be more
Yeah,
acceptable.
absolutely. I think it's totally. I think that's a product of capitalism. You know, it's just they found a way to make money on water, and they pretty much poisoned all the free water. So
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
so
All the
now
free
we're
water is pretty.
No, it's scary because the thing is like uh, air was the last element we didn't pay for. Now we're paying for air with the mask. There's a tax. There's an air tax now.
Oh my God.
You know what I mean? You pay for heat, you pay for water now. I mean, there was a time where buying bottled water was unimaginable, right?
Yeah, it's so unnecessary.
Now you can't think without it. Now with the mask, there's an air tax. We're taxed to breathe. Think about that. And it sort of happened in an instant. Like life has changed. I mean, there's never going to be a time where you're not going to think about wearing an air mask, or even worse.
Well, I think we should definitely continue this conversation and put together some sort of.
I like the acoustic fest though. We've been talking about that.
Yeah, I don't know. I think
Yeah.
if it caught on, it could change the world.
acoustic
Because-
fest all day.
We were gonna do that actually. It got canceled. We had it planned for Brooklyn Bowl, but
Oh,
got canceled, which was a big bummer. We called it Brass World Fest. And
okay.
it was all acoustic horn bands, and we were gonna do it no mics. But
Wow.
oh well, next time.
Yeah,
Oh.
like I'm saying, like if it became something that was popular, it would change like the way people are, like what they do when they're growing up, what kind of instruments they're trying to learn. They're just like, oh man, I saw these acoustic bands, they were so cool. Like the ability that someone's playing this instrument and it's just echoing in this hallway, and that's it, and there's no mics or anything. It was just so incredible to be me as a kid. It influenced me so much that I want to be. I want to be an acoustic trombone player. I want to be a sousaphone player. I want to be whatever. You know, like it's like we can't just accept that like acoustic music is like lame, you know, and people don't like it as much in general. You know what I'm saying?
Well, not only that, just coming from where we've all come from, what type of community gets to see it? is important. That's one of the benefits of being able to be in the subway, is that it's multi-generational. A lot of times playing in clubs, we all know that it can be very ageist. You know what I mean? There's no babies there. There's no 100-year-old lady there. There's a demo there. I think that one of the things that could be dope about doing a festival like this is taking it to places where a lot of people don't get to go out and see music, and not forcing them to drive into the middle of nowhere to experience it, and trying to maybe having it in different locations and making the festival longer and things like that, as opposed to just these 2-day weekend events and things like that. That, you know, because each one of these festivals are an ecosystem to themselves. The larger ones, I know, they're like small towns, depending on how they're organized.
Mm.
Guys, I'm going to jump off, but it was really great to meet all you guys. Wenzel, thanks so much for having this.
Yeah, thank you for joining.
We can all end this.
I'd love to give you all, I'd love to send you all invites to this course, which hopefully is going to be like a, you know, opportunity to think through this whole new paradigm. So maybe Wenzel, you can send me everybody's emails. I'll send everybody a link. But yeah, and
Cool.
It was really great to meet all you guys, and hope we are in touch again soon. You know?
Yes,
cool.
thanks, Daniel.
Later, guys.
Yep, I'm signing off here too, guys. Thank you, guys.
Good to see you all.
Yo, bless. I love everybody. I love you all. You're beautiful.
Thank you,
Stay
Mike.
in touch,
was
but
great
we're gonna
to see
think
y'all.
about like moving forward in this thing in the parks. Maybe I'm gonna look into it. I'll get back and I'll get in touch with everyone.
Parks,
Yes.
parks and
Great.
gyms.
Yeah, let's keep this conversation going, and I think we really do have a very unique opportunity here.
All right,
And
cool.
Parks, gyms, and caves.
Yep.
yeah, oh yeah,
See you guys.
Bye.
peace.
Peace be with you.
Mhm.
RIP to Nate Dogg. I had to regulate.